One thing though, I will be spending in the next couple of weeks talking about, the iceberg theory, and it would be good if you could possibly go to Starting Point's website, go under Vince's Corner, and scroll down to alternate resources, and you'll see the iceberg theory there. You can download it, make a copy of it, and maybe for those of you who basically don't know how to do that on a computer, if you want to send us your email, we can send a copy of it out to you, okay? So it's not a problem. All right, good. I'm going to start off by doing the reading from the language of letting go. And I picked a reading from November 1st. Transition through grief. We're all striving for acceptance and recovery. Acceptance of ourselves, our past, other people, and our present circumstances. Acceptance brings peace, healing, and freedom. The freedom to take care of ourselves. Yet acceptance is not a one-step process. Before we achieve acceptance, we go forward in stages of denial, anger, negotiating, sadness. We call these stages the grief process. Grief can be frustrating, can be confusing. We may go back and forth between sadness and denial. Our behaviors may continue to change. Others may not understand us. We neither understand ourselves nor our own behavior while we're grieving our losses. Then one day things become clear. The fog lifts and we see that we have been struggling to face and accept a particular reality. Don't worry if we are taking steps to take care of ourselves. We move through this process exactly at the pace we're supposed to. Be understanding with yourself and others for the very human way we go through this transition. There I will accept the ways I go through change. I will accept the grief process and its stages, and the way people accept loss and change. I wanted to read that because it kind of puts a lot of information in there that I want to talk about today, because one of the things you have to try to understand, we got into this last week, and we talked about an overview of the iceberg theory. But I want to go actually into the iceberg itself. But I want to do that by explaining something to you. Most people have a hard time with this and don't understand it because going through change is a very tough process. And what that means is that when people are able to put their addiction down, remember I talked about addiction being the cover for our feelings, for stuff that's going on inside of us. And many of us, myself included, we spend a period of time functioning externally, but we don't function internally. We have to really get to know who we really are. And that's a journey. And the scary part about it is many of us are used to the behavior we've been involved in for a long period of time. And again, I use the example of my own life. I went to the seminary when I was 14 years old. I got ordained when I was 26. And then I left the priesthood 20 years later, which meant that was 32 years of my life. It became a normal way of life for me. When it comes to addiction too, remember for many of us, myself included, addiction becomes a way in which we cope and deal with life. It becomes a way in which we can run away from life. It's a place where we can hide. And as a result, then very many times, we're scared to death to move into that new phase of our life, because it means almost like starting all over again. Now, I share this with you as we go into the iceberg to realize what happens. Whenever anybody puts their addiction down, they go through detox or they let go of the embalming fluid, and all of a sudden, they begin to experience something called feelings, memories. Things start to come back up inside of them. And for many of us, we begin to experience trauma, hurt, a lot of pain. And what's so scary to a lot of people, they're scared to move forward. It's much easier to go back to everything we've been used to. I know in my own life it was much easier to go back to being the hero priest, taking care of everybody and just about destroying me. It was very easy to go back into that lifestyle. It was very easy to stay there. But every time we have to go through this concept of change, to let go of our cover, to be able to move forward in a new direction, it's scary. And that's why I say this over and over again. You really can't begin to defrost the iceberg unless you have a lot of support and people to help you through it. Because basically, remember, most of this stuff has been buried inside of us for a long period of time. I tell addicts this all the time, especially when I used to work in the rehab, because a lot of addicts would basically put their drugs and alcohol down, and they're still in a confined environment. Then it was time for them to go back into reality. We actually had to do a re-entry phase with them because going back into reality was scary. See, they were used to being in that, what they called reality, in their addiction. Now they have to go bare out there and begin the process of being exposed, open up new ways and new directions. The process of responsibility and growing up. That's scary. Now, I'll give an example of my own life, transition and change. And this is not just for addiction too, because many people go through divorce, they go through a lot of different things. And sometimes what happens is we don't realize it, but many of us have created what I call that fantasy. This is my magical world because I'm safe here. And we're afraid to be able to reach out, to go through this transition and change, to look at what's going on inside of me. It's interesting, when I was in the priesthood, it was a very comfortable place to be. I mean, think about it for a minute. I was protected from the world. I also basically had a nice house to live in, and my expenses were taken care of. So really, in reality, it's almost like I was living in kind of a, magical place where I didn't have to worry too much. But making change and moving out of that, letting go of what I call my cover, and beginning to experience things on the inside. Then to begin to realize, when you look at the iceberg, you begin to realize what these things really are all about. So one of the things I want you to do when you look at the iceberg is to realize the core and the center of the iceberg. Again, it took me a long time to try to understand this. I never realized over and over again that the core and center is, they use the term self-hatred or the illusion of control, the illusion of fear, which we talked about last week. But really, in reality, what's happening is that I don't want to go to that core, that center. And so they tell you something in doing recovery work. Don't. See, you can't go directly to the core, although the core is the foundation of where it's coming from. But whenever we deal with the iceberg, we deal with feelings. We deal with beginning to get to know myself, beginning to get honest with myself, beginning to grow. I have to start slowly. So melting the iceberg is a slow process, a gradual process. Knowing that deep down inside, in the core center, is that concept of self-hatred, emptiness, loneliness, seeing myself in a negative way, not knowing who I am. And that's not easy for us because it's much easier to go back to the old lifestyle and to live in that. Avoidance, running away. And so I realized today that transition, that change, without support and without people helping you through it, can be very scary. I'll give you a good example in my own life. When I went through my transition and my change and let go of, first of all, letting go of in 1973, letting go of my alcohol, Well, see, I was typical of the iceberg theory. I didn't want to deal with the iceberg, so I just went from one addiction to another addiction. And the other addiction was my eating disorder. And I was told over and over again, I need to stand still to look at myself to find out who I am. Because basically, I thought I knew who I was. But really, in reality, I was living externally on the outside and literally staying busy, and so busy, I never had to look at myself on the inside. And that sometimes is the hardest thing for us to do, to stand still, to walk alongside somebody else, and to say those magical words, please help me. Then I realized it takes a village, it takes a group of people, it takes support to be able to go through this and go through this process. And for a long period of time, I didn't want to go through it. It was much, much easier to avoid it. But transition, change, making decisions, I'm grateful today. I had a great therapist working with me. I had all kinds of people in the support community who basically walked alongside of me. I didn't have to do it alone. That transition and that change opened up a lot of other doors for me. And so when I look at the iceberg, I look at the aspect of the iceberg, I realize that the center of it is the concept was not that I really hated myself. I didn't know who I was. And so I avoided it. I don't want to look at it. And then really as a result then, I began to chip away a little bit at the iceberg. But again, in my case, I'm grateful I had a therapist to work with me. I'm grateful I had a support group and people to take me through the steps. In my other eating disorder program, I had to be able to do a lot of this work. And I find it interesting about transition and change. And I kind of have to share this with you. It's amazing how we deny and we fight and we battle the concept of change. So many of us are scared to be able to face our addictions because then I have to be able to deal with them, but deal with what comes after them. That's why life is like a process. You have to be able to learn your lessons and then be able to move forward. That's the key to what we're talking about today. And so I realize over and over again that deep down inside, there are a lot of issues that were buried for a long period of time. All of us can relate to this in one way or another. And I'm also scared to look at them because if I have to face them, then it's painful to face them. So gratitude, to be open to it, to walk through it, and to realize the fact I'm not alone. I never realized how strong that concept of being spiritually dead, being empty on the inside, having an illusion that I had my life all under control. What a powerful illusion. Walking around in fear, anxiety, and tension, all illusions. Because literally I was living my life that way. Because I was always scared somebody's going to find out about the real me, then they won't like me anymore. So that fear of not being accepted, that fear of being rejected. So many of us have a tendency to begin this process and begin to realize, as I begin to open up the iceberg, I have to look at what are the things that led to these illusions? What are the things that were created to make this illusion start? And so what I do is, when you're going to melt a block of ice, you start from the outside and you work in. And so some of the outside things I outlined for myself when I did the iceberg theory, one of the hardest parts to let go of was grandiosity and feelings of worthlessness. Now they sound like contradictions, right? But I realized that the grandiosity was constantly performing on the outside, but deep down inside, you felt almost like you weren't worthy of things. So people actually said you did a great job. You keep looking for what's wrong with you. So you keep going to the other side all the time. And so it takes time to be able to break these patterns, to be able to make changes in your life, to be able to watch pieces of your life come to an end, new pieces be born. It's powerful. You get beautiful. And so you realize over and over again, what happens as a result of this, you become very self-centered. And you really just think the whole world kind of operates around you. And you also feel like you're going to get criticized or rejected from a lot of people. But you have to be able to process this and work through it. Some of the other things, and again, this is what we do to ourselves, was judgmentalism. Most of us are very hard on ourselves. We judge ourselves. We're always looking at what's wrong. What am I doing? Am I not doing it right? We have to learn there is no right, there is no wrong. And many of us get caught up in that. Because literally, what does it really mean? It means that deep down inside, I don't really know who I am. I'm empty and I'm lonely. And instead of me to be able to share with other people, all of a sudden I realize I'm scared to really share. I'm scared to open up. I'm scared to begin to deal with different types of feelings. You know, one of the scariest things in my life was beginning to feel issues in my sexuality, beginning to look at my life totally differently as my body changed. As I got more and more into my eating disorder recovery, I began to realize the fact that I felt more vulnerable. I felt scared. It's a big part of it. Because again, it always felt like you were losing control, but you keep trying to keep control. That's an illusion. So the concept is you have to be able to let go of control, to ask for help, to ask for guidance, to ask for direction. I share this with you because we can go into other areas. For example, envy, resentments, blaming. Big thing we do a lot of times. When I'm very insecure and no sense of myself, it's much easier to point out the faults of everybody else. Fun game, right? Find out what's wrong with them. I never have to look at me. I'll constantly look at what's wrong with other people. See, again, we have to learn these things and connect with these things. It's a big part of how the recovery process works. Excuse me. And some of the other things we have to look at too is so many of us have developed perfectionism, always wanting to do everything perfectly, afraid to make a mistake. We can go on and on and on about all the inside workings of the iceberg. But each of us has our own concept, our own way. Because some of the things on here I didn't circle, but some I did. And as I go through my journey and learning about life, I may have to circle some more of those things. Because it's a process, and it takes time. Never forget a good friend of mine who's been in recovery from drugs and alcohol. It's got to be at least 18 years now. I was talking to him on the phone the other day. He just checks in with me every once in a while. And I said, "How you doing?" He said, "Well," he says, "I'm starting to really begin to enjoy this new life." I said, "Well, you've been working your program for 18 years now." He said, "Yeah, but I'm actually starting to get it now." I said, "Okay." But he said, "You know, Vince, I got to tell you something." He said, "I never in my wildest dreams imagined I could do half the things I can do today." And that's not bragging. It's like for years and years and years, I denied everything in my life. I ran away from it. I was so scared. I always had the illusion somebody's going to come along and they're going to take it away from me. And so as a result then, I constantly lived in this fear of rejection, fear of approval, and not getting approval. All these things are scary. And as you go on and on through the journey of life, you begin to realize, that every one of us, no matter who we are, have experienced these things. I also never realized that, you're not going to do it perfectly or get it perfectly. You might have to take a step forward, or like they say in recovery, 10 steps forward and 7 backwards. Progress, not perfection. And it's a process you got to go through. Another good friend of mine who was sober for 29 years, he actually said to me one day, he said, Vince, I haven't touched 1/3 of what's going on inside of me. I'm still in denial. I'm still fighting. I'm still battling. And an interesting thing was, he said to me, I can't go to some of these places. I just have to shut it off. Well, he shut it off. But then a few weeks later, he ended up relapsing. It was scary. Thank God we found him and brought him back. But you never know how it triggers different types of things. And that's why it's so important to have a support system, to have people work with you. Because what you're doing is you're going into your level of feelings, going to parts of your body that maybe you haven't felt for a long period of time. And that's why recovery, they talk about this in AA. You first come in, you're in the honeymoon stage. You're flying along. You want to go to about 400 meetings. You want to take everybody to the prison for a meeting, back and forth. And then you go into what they call the slippery slope, which is the stage where you start to really do your work, where you start to make changes, where you start to have to face things that are hard to face, when you get in touch with your feelings. And that's why they tell you, enjoy the honeymoon, or until you get to the birth of the new you, the new child inside of you. It's a powerful process, but it does work. So you learn after a period of time, there are all types of issues that come along with the concept of the iceberg. I recommend getting a copy, seeing where you fit. See, one of the things I realize also is that many of us don't even realize some of the things that are deep down inside of us. But again, don't go too deep, all right? A little bit at a time. And that's why they say this over and over again. People say to me, when will I get to that point in my recovery where I will have dealt with everything? I say about 15 years after you're dead. There's no such thing. There's always things in life we can learn about, we can grow, but don't ever stop. Because really, is this a process where I'm going to be analyzing myself? No. It's a process where I'm able to finally identify some of my behaviors, be able to adjust them in a positive way, and know that they don't define who I am. Only I can define who I am by the way I live my life. And so we look at some of these behaviors and things that we go through. For example, making up stories, lying, making believe you have answers to things when you don't have them. A lot of this behavior is very scary because it really comes down to the fact that I know everything, you know nothing. Now, what is that? It's a new addiction. Now I'm caught up in power. I'm caught up in different types of things. And I'll give you an example. A good friend of mine who went through a halfway house, a starting point. I'm going way back now to 1979, 1980. And when he left starting point, he said to me, I've seen the light. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I'm going to go from here and I'm going to start. get a whole group of men together and start a thing called the Big Book. They called it the Big Book Thumpers, and they got very much like a little cult. And in order to bring a new member in, you had to pass a test. Finally, I went down and talked to him, and I said, "What the hell are you doing?" He said, "We're helping people. We're going to fix them. We're going to help them to straighten their lives out." I said, "It's not your job. You have to leave these people alone. You realize you're still in your addiction? What you're doing is you're trying to control everybody. You're refusing to have them go to this concept and to learn and grow from it. That's the most important part. We have to be able to accept that. That's why I talked about acceptance in the book. But you notice one thing in the book that's really powerful. I'm going to share it with you. Okay, the concept that we can go back and forth and back and forth. We can break out of our old patterns, find yourself down the road going back into them. You got to break back out of them again. That's okay, by the way, because please try to understand something. Every period of your life, no matter what you lived, is in this computer up here. So on occasion, yes, I may be involved in something where it's really bothering me and I'm really upset. And I just want to go back and relieve that pressure for a period of time. We call that relapse a lot of times, but sometimes people do it. Doesn't mean they're bad, doesn't mean that something's wrong with them, it just means it happened. And then they have to come back again. It's all part of the process. And so it's not like you want to be able to sit back on your laurels. It's almost like you want to be able to open the door up so you can learn more about yourself, do some more growing, begin to look at things differently. But like they show you in the diagram, look at your outside issues first, eventually move towards the center. I think that's the most important part of this, because you're realizing a little bit at a time, what am I doing? I'm beginning to let go of some of my behaviors from the past. And on occasion, they will come back and visit. I use this analogy, I've used it a lot. I call it the jailhouse analogy. Visualize yourself as a jailer. And the jail contains your addictions, it contains your issues, contains all the stuff you've been able to identify. And yet you know there are still wanted posters up on the wall for other areas you still have to find. And so it's a process of learning. But above all, I got to say this because I care a lot about you. A lot of people, when they begin to do this work, they have a tendency to beat themselves up and say, look what I did. How come these behaviors are the reality of who I really am? It's not true. And so I have to learn that yes, I'm going to be able to make some changes. Just take an example, the grandiosity thing. Yes, on occasion I'm going to get a little more grandiose and I'll be able to be out there. But now I'm going to learn to bring myself back in. I have to learn to calm myself down. Because I'm learning I don't have all the answers to everything. That's not easy, believe me. It's much easier to go back to the old and then keep coming back. And sometimes you got to go back and forth, back and forth. We call that running the gauntlet. Excuse me, I'm sorry. That came from nowhere. It's like I have to run a gauntlet. I use the example of this. Many times in life, I let go of my addiction. I begin to make changes. I begin to grow. I get scared. I get afraid. So I go back to my addiction. I gotta let go again. I go back again. And eventually, hopefully, I'll be able to be stronger in this area. That's why we have relapse. Relapse is part of life. I'm not advocating it, but it is going to happen on occasion. On occasion, you will have relapses. It might be emotional, it might be spiritual. Things are going to happen to you. It's all part of the process we go through in life, which means none of us are going to do this process perfectly. Isn't that amazing? I just hope nobody thinks they are, because you're not. And so again, you're going to have good days and bad days. And hopefully you have more good days than you have bad days. That's all. And it's a process of learning. But how do you learn the most? By making mistakes. You know, my father used to say, I told you before, only until you learn to fall down can you learn to get up. So mistakes are part of life. So sometimes in life we have to make mistakes in order to learn to grow. And sometimes we got to be able to go through a little tension, a little growth process. And I really believe the higher power sends people into our life, situations into our life, that almost takes us through this. So we learn by our errors, we learn by our mistakes, we grow from them. And that's part of growing, that's part of learning. You know, I always joke about this, but it's not a joke. When you first come into recovery, it's like being a grammar school kid. And you really need somebody to guide you and be with you. Then you go into the high school phase of recovery. And you end up, you know, getting a little cocky, ego gets into place, and yet we still are learning and we're growing. Then we go to the college stage. We actually think we've got it all together. Then we go back into the reality stage of life. The reality stage might be marriage, it might just be relationships, it might just be job, whatever it is. And here I go now. Now I got to take this recovery show and bring it on the road and live it in my daily life. It was easier to do this when I had teachers and people in those other stages guiding me. But now all of a sudden, I'm going back into reality. I get up in the morning, I go to work. And my job might be fantastic and wonderful, and some days it might be a pain in the you-know-what. And some days work out, and some days don't work out. Your emotional system is the exact same way. And so a little bit at a time, I got to begin to realize the fact that part of developing my wholeness, part of me becoming strong, part of me beginning to work through some of these issues is to realize and learn the other side of them. So be able to affirm yourself and look at yourself in a positive way. So opening up the iceberg is never easy. You do a little bit at a time, but you're beginning to learn something. I can love myself. I can be able to put myself together. I can be able to experience this journey. But I have to be able to be vulnerable and be open to new things and new directions. I mean, we're going through that right now in the starting point. We're going through transition and change. We have new people coming on board. You know, the old guard is excuse me, Loretta, but the old guard is beginning to move back, and the new guard is coming on. And so everything has to go through that. Even myself, I'm the old guard. You know, I look at these two young whippersnappers, as I call them. They're back there in their 50s and their 40s, and they got energy coming out both sides of their ears. They're ready to roll, you know, and I love it. But do I even understand what they're talking about sometimes? No. They're talking all this technology stuff and everything else, and how you can reach people this way and reach people that way and do this thing. I just sit there and say, whatever works. I'm open to it. So I'm going to go through a new learning curve too. So here I go, back to grammar school again. to begin the process. But you know, that's what's exciting about life, that it's not cookie cutter. That's one reason why I love this iceberg theory so much, because it really helped me to realize these issues are part of who I am. I don't have to be them. I can learn and grow from them and move forward. And I'll spend a lot more time on this when I do the addiction, the recovery piece. Because I really believe that we're just people and going through growth, going through learning, going through discovery. You have to just be open to new things and new directions. Do you have to like them all? Of course not. You have to come to an acceptance? Yeah. It is reality. And so we live in a world of reality. We live in a world, but at the same time, I can still be a spiritual person, working on myself, learning and growing, and be able to have the support system around me to help me do it. And so what I share today is really this. The core of the iceberg is self-hatred, but really in reality is the illusion of control, the illusion of fear, the illusion that we have it all together, the illusion that we think we're done. But really in reality, it means that deep down inside, I'm spiritually empty, I'm spiritually dead. So it's time for me to come alive. That doesn't make any difference what age you are. It's a process of learning, a process of growing. That's what's so important. And that's the key to this whole process. And so I'll spend more time on the iceberg theory next week on the issues and stuff to that effect. I'll talk its connection back to addiction. We'll go back and forth with it. And then we'll talk a lot about the recovery process and how it works. I'm saying to begin to understand that as we go into this new phase of life, you have to defrost the iceberg. Don't get an axe and cut it open. Defrost it slowly. It's like this, it's no different than the other concept. You have to peel the onion. You take the outside off first, then the next layer, then the next layer. But see, codependence, we get a little cocky sometimes. We want to take the axe to it and go right to the middle. Doesn't work. You just reinforce the craziness in your life. So a little bit at a time, it's about growing and learning. That's the key to everything we do in life. So my prayer today is that we're able to take a look within ourselves, begin to get to know ourselves better, and realize the beautiful gift that we are. So let us pray. God, we come before you in prayer. We ask the God of our understanding, our divine presence, to help us to be able to look within, to be able to understand who we are, to understand the different parts of us, to understand that there still is some frozen things inside of us, that when we're ready, we'll begin to defrost them. We only work on what we're ready to work on, Lord. So please, be patient with us, and we know you are. Be open to us and help us on this journey. And know that a little bit at a time I will get to know you better, get to know life better, and be able to experience and enjoy life a lot more. Teach me the gift of patience, the gift of slowness, the gift of learning, the gift of discovery. And may that gift always be inside of me, no matter what I do in life. For you are my God, my strength. You are the one that will guide and help me on this journey. So Lord, I pray, I ask for your divine guidance and love. I pray that you'll always be with us and teach me to always, always, always ask for your love, to ask for your guidance, and ask for your direction. We pray and we ask this every day, and we pray in God's name. Amen.